Everyone, my name is Keith Parent, and I am the CEO of Court Square Group. And this is the Driving the Business of Science podcast. What this podcast is all about is I learned a very long time ago there's lots of people that help to develop drugs and get drugs out to market. And in the course of my business, I find a lot of those people, and I want to be able to hear their story and have them talk about their story. And I think it's a great way for people to understand that it's not just scientists in the back room doing something, but it's a lot of other people trying to figure out how to do things in the economics of the situations and all sorts of ways of dealing with drug development. Today, we have a special guest. Her name is Sarah Norrie. She is the CEO of Plenitude Pharma, and we're going to talk about Plenitude Pharma and some of the drug shortages. First, I'm going to talk about Court Square and let you know that we are a managed service firm. We manage IT infrastructure for life science companies. And we also have a content repository that's built within our audit-ready compliant cloud environment called RegDocs 365, which is a clinical repository for any kind of clinical and regulatory content. With that being said, I want to now turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, let's hear. What's your story? Tell me a little bit about Plenitude.
Well, again, Keith, thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. I would just like to point out that this is my very first one, so I'm excited and a little nervous, but yeah, really happy that we could, have the time to have a little chat today.
Excellent.
So I am a co-founder and CEO of Plenitude Pharma, and I created this company because I felt that there was a gap in healthcare that needs to be addressed, and specifically that is drug shortages and discontinuation. So unfortunately, there's a lot of medicines out there that are really necessary and essential for people. And unfortunately, they can't always keep up with demand. And so there's supply issues. And or sometimes companies just decide not to make a product anymore and it goes on the FDA's discontinued list. And I think that there is a real need here for us to make sure that the people that need those medicines that are so critical for individuals are available. So
So
that's
what
kind of
what
where
got you
Plenitude is.
what got you into looking at the shortages and looking at that? That seems like a real niche area. What made you start looking at that?
Well, it is. Well, to give you a little bit of background for me, I have a PhD in medical science. I specialize in actually cardiovascular work, but for a long time I was a chemist. So I've worked for big pharma companies. I've worked for small startups. I've also worked for the NIH, so I've worked on the government side of things. And in all of my decades of working in healthcare and medicine and science, I realized that there is this need that must be met. Big pharma companies, they're looking for the next big innovative product, and we need that. We need to be advancing science and medicine, but I believe really that we need smaller companies to kind of take up the slack and make sure that we're not leaving any patient behind. And so that's really kind of where I came into effectively looking at discontinuations and critical drug shortages.
Why would a drug get discontinued? What's some of the reasons for some of that?
Well, so actually there's many reasons for it. It could be something as simple as just the economics. Honestly, as I said before, big companies, they're spending billions of dollars and decades to find the next big blockbuster drug. And when they do that, a lot of these companies have finite manufacturing capacities, which means in order to get that blockbuster drug to the market, they then need to stop capacity on other products. So it could be something as simple as that. It could be that two companies merged, right? And maybe they had competing products and they only want to go with one of them. There's also, unfortunately, supply chain issues, right? We're having a really hard time having resilient drug supply. And that could be raw material issues, that could be just quality issues within the manufacturing plant itself. There could be a change in testing standards. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into the complexity of making drug products.
How long have you been going at it at this point now? Getting things going, getting up and running?
So Plenitude Pharma is almost at 2 years. So we're very, very new. We're in our infancy stages. looking for, wonderful investors that really understand where Plenitude is coming from, which is, as you said, we're kind of a niche pharma company. But I really believe that we can help people.
Do you have any specific areas or therapeutic areas or types of drugs that you're looking at to try to bring back out to the market, or things you're focusing in on?
Yeah, well, of course, I have, some things that are near and dear to my heart. I'm looking at a couple of women's health products. Oncology products are always big on the list. But it's really kind of focusing on what's currently on the FDA's drug shortage list and or has been discontinued. And I mean, if you think about it, I actually, if you don't mind, I looked at the FDA's drug shortage list today. And as of right now, there are 76 drugs that are on the shortage list.
Wow.
And two of them have been added even since the beginning of this year. And I would like to say that companies are doing better. Back in 2024, the first quarter, there were over 300 drugs on the FDA's drug shortage list.
Wow. Well, if I think about the whole concept of drugs that are on the shortage list and um, being probably the targets for what you want to do, um, you know, when you think about COVID and all the shortages that we had around COVID, I guess it hits really home when if some other natural thing were to happen and some of those drugs were actually on that list. So it sounds like it's a really interesting area to be in and something. Now, being a niche pharma company, how's the funding landscape right now? How are you finding out there? I know I hear a lot from other biotechs that we deal with and all the other companies. It's pretty tough. Tell me about what your journey in that space.
Well, absolutely. So I think it's difficult for everybody to find money. I don't think there's people out that are, standing on the street corner going, "Oh, I'm going to give you millions of dollars," right? I mean, so I think it's always tricky for all of us. As I said, being in this kind of niche pharma area, it has been difficult because we're really looking at helping individuals, and we're doing so by looking at drug shortages. A lot of the drugs that we're looking at are considered to be generics, so there's no more exclusivity rights, there's no more patents we have to worry about. But because we're looking into the generics market, we tend to have kind of some like profit margin erosion, right? So the profit margins are just smaller than you would be with like a big blockbuster drug. And so it's really just trying to find the right investor that recognizes what we're trying to do, which is continuing to make sure that the prescriptions that people need, that their doctors are writing for them, can be filled. And so it's kind of, getting that kind of investor that recognizes that.
Well, I also think that in this era that a lot of people are talking about trying to bring manufacturing back to the States and keep it here and things like that. I know that we in our own history had a number of customers, and one of the clients that we had um, was going bankrupt, and they were a foreign company owned them. They were here in the United States, so it was all American workers doing things, but they were run by a foreign entity, and they were going bankrupt, so they weren't really pushing much into it. They were looking to try to save. So a bunch of the people that were in the company were looking to try to save it. They were trying to find it, local people. We worked with them for about a year and a half. I could tell you it was painful as a vendor to somebody like that, holding all their data while they're going through the issue of dealing with bankruptcy. It was an interesting thing. But they came out the other end and they found an acquirer here in the States. And I can tell you that they're up and running and they're doing great. And I think that, they were one of the last penicillin manufacturers here in the United States. And I think that they even were able to get some congressional statements around the fact that they didn't want to lose that type of manufacturer here in the United States. So I think any kind of thing like that is worth going after and trying to work with. You mentioned something to me when we first talked, the concept of off patent, off exclusivity, OPOE. Tell me a little bit
Mhm.
more about that and some of the types of drugs that fall in that category. Are those the generics you were just talking about?
Yes, yeah. So typically, we love the word generic. I think a better term is off patent, off exclusivity, because that really kind of puts you into another category, especially from an FDA standpoint, as far as like, if you want to bring a drug to market, whether it's a drug shortage or a discontinuation, there's a slightly different pathway for things that are going to be considered to be a generic. So it's kind of the ANDA pathway instead of the NDA one. And so what you essentially have to do is just make sure that your drug is obviously safe and effective, but it should be bioequivalent to whatever is the current marketed or branded drug. And so there tends to be a quicker pathway. And especially if the drug is in a drug shortage, a lot of times the FDA will do what's called an expedited review process. So you can actually even get it to the market quicker, which is nice.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
So do you in your endeavors of trying to put things together, do you have any specific drug products that you're looking at right now? Can you talk about that, or is that something that you don't you want to hold by the wayside so nobody else kind of beats you to the punchline?
A little bit of both. I spoke to, a women's health product, and I think there's some out there that, I think the whole women's health arena is very underserved. I'm looking at a couple products there. I won't be specific on that one. But as far as oncology goes, there's been quite a few. And I'll just speak to a couple of them in general. One of them being BCG. So that is a cancer product for bladder cancer, so non-muscle invasive bladder cancer. And there's one manufacturer that makes it for the entire US. And it's Merck, and it's a big company, great company. But that has been on the FDA's drug shortage list for 7 years now, since 2019. I know that they're actively trying to find ways to, bolster their production. But even still, I think it's really sad, and to me, doesn't go toward a resilient healthcare supply when we only have one manufacturer of a product. The FDA would really love to have two, three, four, five manufacturers, right? Because I wouldn't, I don't want Merck to have any problem, but if they do have some sort of problem with their facility, now there's no product being made, right? So, I mean, we really do need to look at having a reliable drug supply chain. And I think that goes toward having multiple manufacturers.
Excellent. What are there any special things you're doing from a money raising perspective out there right now as you're going out to the market? Are you going to any specific shows on trying to find people in the niche areas? Are there family offices you're going after? Have you thought about the kind of way that you're doing that?
Yeah, so I mean, I try and go to a lot of different shows. I, I'm like I said, we're still new in our infancy stages. So I think only in the last 6 months have we really kind of gotten everything together, and we've gotten a website set up, and we've kind of gotten all of our documentation in order. So I think now that in the last 6 months we've done that, we can really start pushing. But yeah, I do try to get to shows and perfect my pitch and see what's out there. And people are always very interested. So it's just they're interested, and they might have other people that are more interested. And so it's just really about networking and making the right connections. To me, it's not an if, it's a when. I know that this company will be successful, and it might take a little time, but it will happen. So
So when I hear, go back to your OPOE discussion and talking about
yeah.
that, when you talk about generics and you talk about um, finding things off patent, off exclusivity, and going after them or single manufacturers, it seems like there should be a lot more competition in that space. Do you find that there's a lot of competition from a generics perspective here in the States or abroad, or is that something that you're not that worried about?
I'm not that worried about it. I think there are a lot of generics manufacturers, but there's really like only a couple really, really big ones. And, they make a lot of products. But again, if there's only one or two big generics companies, that's, maybe only still one or two suppliers, right? And, we really should have three to five at least suppliers of essential medicines. So no, I'm not too worried about that. I also think that there are some bigger generics companies, and they go for the products that are just about to come off the like what they call a patent cliff. So, there's a lot of branded products out there, and, they're only going to have, patent protections for, well, typically up to 20 years. But by the time you're actually on the market, it's probably less than 10. So once that branded drug hits the patent cliff, there are a lot of bigger generics companies that have a lot more money than I will currently have that can that can easily then be like the first generic with like 100-day exclusivity and whatnot. So I'm really looking for more gold standard. The drug's been around for a while. It's still very necessary. Obviously, smaller profit margins, but it's a critical drug that needs to be addressed and available to patients.
The fact that it's on that FDA list about um, the drugs that are needed out there, um, what's your ultimate goal for that? Are you looking to try to fill all those? Or are you trying to, what's the future hold for Plenitude?
Well, as I like to say, we are going to solve the drug shortage uh, conflict one medicine at a time. Um, you know, obviously, if we could, you know, blossom up and become a big generics manufacturer, absolutely, I would love that. That's a great lofty goal. But realistically, I'm looking at getting 1 to 2 products out in the first 3 years, and then hopefully doing 1 to 2 products every year after that. And just, kind of growing, kind of stepwise and making it happen.
For those drugs that are on those FDA lists, are there anything special that you get out of the FDA other than, or you already talked about the fact that you might have faster approval or things like that, but is there anything else that you might get out of that, or is it just that?
Um, no, it's really you can probably do an expedited pathway. The FDA is a very regulated governmental agency, and they want to make sure that whatever product is put out by any manufacturer, that first and foremost it is safe and effective, and it's exactly what people are supposed to be getting. So yeah, there's not going to be too much in addition than maybe having an expedited pathway, only because the FDA recognizes that when a drug goes on the shortage list, it means that there's just not enough supply to cover the demand, and the patients are suffering, and they don't want that. So, they'll try and help you with that pathway, and making it maybe go a little bit quicker. But, there's still rigorous testing that's involved. There are still, review and audits of the manufacturing plants and everything like that. You're not getting a pass on any of those things.
When you look at that drug shortage list, do you
Mhm.
have you prioritized it as to what you see as things that are needed the most out there, or what how does when it gets on the shortage list, that means that there's so many people that need it, so the demand for that is high, but there's only so much that's going around. Tell me about that. How are you calculating any of that stuff out?
Yeah, so I think you have to look at it by that you are gonna just first off obviously like identify a need, right? So, you can look at the FDA's drug shortage list, and they also have a discontinuation list. The ASHP also has their own drug shortage list. And so you kind of need to just see what drugs are out there that are on the shortage list, how long they've been out there. You can look to see how many manufacturers are currently making that drug. You kind of want to then, validate like the clinical demand. You want to then kind of, select kind of like strategically. So, clinical risks, feasibility, its impact on the market. There's kind of a lot of things that go into it. And then, as I said before, I believe that women's health is a very underserved market. So I kind of always prioritize any sort of, women's health products as something that is kind of near and dear to my heart that I would want to kind of put up on the list as well.
Well, and I think that there are a lot of products that are needed on the women's health side of things, and I've been involved in a couple of different endeavors dealing with women's health. Actually, I was just speaking with the CEO of a company that's coming out with a new diagnostic. Um, will actually be a podcast participant in a few weeks, because his story is pretty interesting and how that goes. So I applaud what you're trying to do there, and focus in on that, because I think that that'll be a hugely underserved market. Now, as we start to get close to wrapping things up, tell me some of your final thoughts. What are you thinking about, the next steps for you and where you're going and where Plenitude's headed?
Yeah, well, I mean, for us, really the next big steps are just, finding the right investor, that believes in us, believes in me, believes in the work that we want to do. That's really the next big step. And once we, get some investment in, it's a I don't want to say it's a quick process, but it will ramp up very quickly. I firmly believe that, we have the right expertise, I think, already in place. And then we can always, contract and collaborate with other individuals to make sure that, we hit the ground running, and it will be a pretty quick process. I'm hoping that once we have funding, I can get the first product on the market. Actually, I'm hoping at like the 18-month mark. So
Wow, that's pretty
yeah,
quick. So I want to
yeah.
encourage anybody out there, anybody that's listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, if you're looking to invest in somebody that's going after women's health or going after these shortages that are out there, here's an avenue. Take it up, look at it. I wish you all the best, Sarah. I hope that everything comes through to you and you find those investors pretty quickly.
Well, and Keith, I mean, honestly, it's such a pleasure to be able to speak with you today, and give me an opportunity to do this. And yeah, and I will say, we'll end up having to do bioequivalent studies and other things, and we'll be using your company.
I like that. That's even better. Well, I want to thank you again, Sarah. Everybody, thank you
Yeah,
all for watching our podcast or listening to our podcast, and look forward to doing some more in the future for you. Thanks, everybody.
great. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.